Hello and welcome, I'm Tafara Gadamu. Negotiations over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam have continued intermittently. Cooperation, as I say, is the only way out. But what actually is Ethiopia demanding, and what has been achieved thus far? My guest today, Dr. Takele Seboka, has extensively written on the human rights to water. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
GERD is at the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. GERD is as thorny as it has been in 2011. Really a source of a tug of war, if you will, primarily between Egypt and Ethiopia.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's the first time Ethiopia tried to harness the waters of the Nile, and it's unprecedented. So Egyptians have found every reason to be alarmed because they have been using, the whole of what the Nile offers so far. So that hegemony is about to change, and therefore it's almost like a war situation. A war is not just hot war. There's also cold war, where we don't shoot.
Hegemony, Egyptian hegemony over the Nile, of the waters of the Nile. I mean, that's very interesting. So GERD is an economic issue, a political issue, as much as it is an economic one.
It is. Politically, for Egypt, what you do towards the Nile is what contributes to whether you win or lose your election. For Ethiopia, it's probably more economic than political. It is political because you show that you have the capacity to develop your economic powers. You can use your own natural resources. But for Egypt, it's economic, but also political. It's what you do with the Nile. That is very important in their domestic politics.
So, well, we know that every time an Egyptian president comes to power, the issue of the Nile is top of the agenda, and they have to come up with a very solid argument as far as protecting the waters of the Nile is concerned, right?
That's correct. Not only the Egyptians, the British, even the Greeks, when they were ruling over that area, say that who controls the Nile controls Egypt. So what you say, what you do in relation to the Nile is very important. It's actually their lifeblood. That's their politics. That's the core of it, more than any political issue.
Coming back to the GERD, the negotiations going on, right?
Right.
Sometimes stalled, and they get started. It's always been like that.
Yes.
But it's now on and it's now off. It's very interesting for us watching from a distance.
I did a little bit of research a couple of years ago, and I think those reasons still stand correct. It's the issue of, when you touch an established rule, there is always a resistance. Initially, I think there was reticence on the part of Egypt because there wasn't a threat towards the established hegemony because Ethiopia didn't have the capacity. And Egyptians and the Sudanese experts made sure that Ethiopia didn't get access to funding from international institutions such as the World Bank, IMF, even African Development Bank. They have top experts who sit there, advise these institutions, but also write internal rules for lending money to Ethiopia. So when you go there with an application, they say, no, go back, negotiate with Egypt. Once you agree, we're ready to give you the money. That's not possible because the rules favor those parties, not Ethiopia. You don't have the money. So you don't build the dam. If you don't build the dam, why should Egypt be worried? So initially, they were a little bit reticent. So they were talking about other issues, environmental factors, water quality, not the quantity of it. Now, Ethiopia started to look for alternative source of funding from individual countries such as China, but also from domestic sources. The people have contributed immensely to the building of the dam. Once you start to show that you have the capacity to, harness the waters of the Nile, now there is a real threat. Egypt starts to come to the position.
And the form of negotiation changes, is that what
the tone of it, the form of it, the form of the negotiation has changed because there is now a clear and present danger to the pre-existing hegemony. So that changed. But then, where do we conclude this negotiation? How much is Ethiopia willing to give? How much is Egypt and Sudan willing to accept as part of Ethiopia's fair share of the Nile. So that's one thing. So the uncertainty of what will happen after Ethiopia fills this dam. But the other one is that there is a fear. The water that reach the Aswan is not just the Blue Nile. It comes from the White Nile. What Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt conclude by way of negotiation now will have a precedent for Egyptian negotiation with White Nile countries. So there is that fear as well. So Egypt and Sudan usually take a very cautious approach. And Ethiopia does the same as well. So as far as Ethiopia is concerned, we've never used the Nile in any proper, meaningful sense. So how much are we willing to give away? And the other one is this issue of, the other reason is this issue of mutually exclusive doctrines, which arise from sovereignty. Ethiopia tends to use the absolute territorial sovereignty approach. Whatever happens in Ethiopia is Ethiopia's property. That was the old approach. Initially, the negotiations from the Ethiopian side were based on this. The Egyptians use the absolute territorial integrity. So that means do not...
Securitization of...
Yes, securitization. Don't touch the Nile because you will affect Egyptian access to it. Ethiopia says, no, we use the polar opposite of this view. Nile is Ethiopia's water. We use it the way we like. These were two polar opposites in terms of doctrines, in terms of conceptions. But now we have to come to a middle ground where both countries, all these three countries come out of it in a win-win scenario and reach a win-win conclusion. So reaching that situation is where the nuances are at the moment. Will I give this much? And then how much am I going to lose? So that's the kind of...
But isn't that bringing down the whole conversation into pretty little things?
It is. Let me say this. The negotiation on the GERD is actually the bare minimum, the floor of the negotiation that we are going to face regarding the Nile. Because we're not going to use any amount of water from the GERD. We will store the water in the GERD, use it for power production, and release the water. Assume we've started to build a dam for irrigation.
That would be a totally different story.
That would be a totally different dimension. So the problems, the diplomatic and legal wranglings we are facing at the moment will exponentiate. So what we are talking about, let's not be mistaken. This is the smallest level of negotiation. Many people consider it as the final battle. No, this is the tip of the iceberg. This is where we start. We are not talking about consumptive utilization of the waters of the Nile. We are using non-consumptive utilization. Assume we start to reduce the volumes of the water, then we will have another level of, legal and political wranglings, and another battle ensues. So we are talking about little issues at the moment. Let's not be mistaken about that.
So where do we stand as far as these negotiations are concerned between the two countries? In a way, the other riparian countries are not involved in the. No. That's a different political story, which is set aside. But where does the negotiation stand now, and what are the bottlenecks that we are facing in the process?
Where we are at the moment is similar to the situation of prisoner's dilemma. Will I accept it? Will I not accept it? Will I do that? Will I do this? Recently, as you know, the negotiations came back from the American brokered framework to the UN Security Council to the African Union. And the African Union is an organization established by at least Egypt and Ethiopia as the founding members, and Sudan is also a member. So that is where it is, obviously. And apparently, the negotiation took off well, then it stalled. Firstly, Sudan wanted to have some time to think about what was being discussed. I'm not privy to the internal negotiations, but I work for the African Union, And that's the amount of information I have. So
you're talking about Sudanese ambivalence here?
Yeah, initially. But then, before Sudan came back showing its readiness to start the negotiations, Ethiopia said, we come up with some options. Then now, even Egypt said, let's take some more time. Apparently, they took their time, they made up their mind, they started to come back and renegotiate at African Union level. We don't know what the internal dynamics are at the moment. So we don't know what the conclusion would be. But I think this is the first time the three countries will have a negotiated conclusion if it happens. And it's bound to happen. There's no way out for the three countries. So ambivalence wouldn't take us anywhere near the solution of the Nile issues. 86% of the water that is stored at Aswan goes from the Blue Nile. And we're going to reduce that amount because Ethiopia is entitled to its equitable and reasonable share. That's part and parcel of international law. It's not just a treaty law in international law. It's a customary rule of international law. So no power can stop Ethiopia from making use.
On the surface of it, everybody accepts. Every partner to this deal accepts it, right? Literally.
Yeah. The problem is so far it was theoretical.
Yeah.
It was theoretical. It was conceptual. Now we're starting to see that Ethiopia is making effort to use its share. This is the beginning of it. So the practice is different from the theory. You can accept any lofty principle. Egypt didn't have any problem in accepting that Ethiopia is entitled to its fair share. But the moment you start to reduce the waters,
that's really the trouble.
That's a different dimension.
The negotiations started in our region, held here, between the three countries, Khartoum, Cairo, and Addis Ababa, and suddenly moved to Washington, D.C.
Yes.
I mean, was that a wrong move, you think?
The move to the Washington, D.C. and then...
Was that the right move, or...?
Look, any route of negotiation is always okay to start with. But look at how it went. The Americans started as observers. Then suddenly, their role changed, and they became... the party that, comes up with rules to advise Ethiopia to accept this. So the first question to ask is, why did we choose, why did the Egyptians prefer Americans? Why not European Union? Why not even World Bank, although America is a big part of it? Why not these multilaterals? Why not a single country? It's because America is a closer friend to Egypt than to Ethiopia. Egypt is of more strategic political importance to the Americans in terms of their clout in the Arab League, etc. So Egypt preferred us. And you could see how America was a neutral arbiter in the process because they betrayed their own national rule and the rules that they accepted at international law, which is the principle of equitable and reasonable utilization. If you take the case of Rio Grande, for example, that river flows from U.S. to Mexico. America somehow curtailed a huge amount of water from Rio Grande, and Mexico complained. Then the American, this is 19th century precedent, the American Attorney General said, we release an amount of water that we see as surplus to America's use. Otherwise, there is no law that limits America's right to curtail the waters of Rio Grande. Because in that situation, the U.S. was Ethiopia and Mexico was Egypt. America was upstream country and Mexico downstream. In the 19th century, an opposite scenario happened. A film from British Columbia in Canada started to flow into U.S. U.S. found itself in Egyptian position now, downstream to Canada. Then they said, no, the principle we stated in relation to Mexico was wrong. Rio Grande principle was wrong. So they established a commission with Canada and accepted the principle of equitable and reasonable utilization. That's the rules they apply between their states. That's the rules they bequeathed to international law. In fact, the final drafter of the International Water Courses Law for the UN is an American professor, Stephen McCaffrey. He took that law from American national law and put it into international law. So this is the law they accept. When they come to denial negotiation, they use the opposite principle. Why? That change of position shows that the Americans are not neutral in this negotiation. Ethiopia.
So how late into the conversation did Ethiopia realize that America was not fair in its treatment of all this?
If the information I have is correct, it was very late. From the very beginning, Ethiopia used a very tentative approach, but towards the end, the Americans, again, if my source is correct, the Americans almost went to the extent of writing an agreement for Egypt and Ethiopia to come and sign on a dotted line.
According to one of the close observers, arm twisting.
That's right. That's exactly what it was. Then Ethiopia kind of withdrew from the process. And what happened then? The negotiation went to the UN Security Council. It didn't go to the International Court of Justice, which is a judicial body, which uses the law to sit as arbiter between the two parties, or the three parties in this case. And Security Council is a political organization. Why do you go there? If you think that Ethiopia infringed on your right, Egypt would have gone to the ICJ. It didn't do that. It went to Security Council because America sits there with its veto power. Again, if my internal sources are correct, Ethiopia used a huge negotiation skill and also diplomatic channels to convince Russia and China to vote in their favor if it comes down to the veto issue.
Which it did not.
It didn't come to that, and thankfully. And then it came back to the African Union, which is an organization established by all these three negotiating countries. And this is a huge victory, not just for Ethiopia, but also for the other parties too, because it's their own organization.
But what is exactly the role of the African Union in these negotiations? Is it just a venue? Is it just providing the platform for those parties, for the three countries to sit down and talk about it, and the others are listening? Or what exactly is it?
I think they are playing a very active role, convincing this country to do this. To reach an accepted solution, a solution that is acceptable to all the three negotiating partners. So the South African president and even other statesmen of Africa are playing an active role, sitting between the two parties, suggesting solutions. Of course, there is no arm twisting. That was tried by the Americans. It doesn't go to that extent, but the African leaders African Union usually uses a conciliatory approach. So they talk to you, they talk to me, and they bring us together. That is the approach the African Union uses, even in its formal negotiations on any topic. That's what's happening. I was a legal advisor until very recently in the Peace and Security Department. This is the modus operandi. So talk to them privately and then bring them together, suggest solutions as Africans. That said, let me just add that this is a very, very important precedent even for the African Union. Why? Excepting 3 countries in Africa, 52 African countries share international rivers. So if African Union gets this right, if it solves this in line with international law and in a fair and equitable manner, then it will have solved similar problems that might arise in Africa in the future. Cote d'Ivoire and Mozambique share 9 rivers with neighbors. Guinea shares 40 rivers with others. Do we have similar countries as Egypt that receive most of their water from other countries? We do. Botswana receives 94% of water for its national use from other countries. So for African Union itself, this is it will be a landmark case. If they get it right, they will have solved their own future water-related conflict problems. You've
been talking about water as a human right.
Yep.
That was, you wrote about it extensively.
That's right.
About that issue. The wastage that's happening out in Egypt is much more than we think it is at the surface level. What do you think about that? So much water is being lost in Egypt, in those reservoirs, in the Aswan Dam, in right?
Yeah, absolutely. talking of the Aswan Dam and talking of the water wastage in Egypt, let's just talk about the Nile, the Aswan Dam, not just the rest of the wastage in the country, which is huge. The Aswan Dam stores 84 billion cubic meters of water annually at any given time. And 10 billion cubic meters are lost every year to evaporation and seepage. And that's massive. We don't even use a quarter of that from the Nile now. If the two countries, Egypt and Sudan, Ethiopia, for example, could save 10 billion cubic meters, that would have solved a lot of problems we're talking about now. So the water shortage in Egypt they are talking about, which is not as drastic as it is in Ethiopia, is because of wastage. Because thanks to these negotiations, the Egyptian government recently, I think a week ago, has declared measures.
Yeah, they've been talking about it for many years, but definitely they have...
Now, because there is a clear problem in front of them now, because we are going to start to reduce the waters here. And the Nile riparian countries should do the same in the future because of shortage of rains and drought and population explosion. So water will be reduced from the sources, from upstream countries. So Egyptians have started to do that. So in terms of water wastage, the Aswan Dam is not only a wasteful dam. It's not even one of the wasteful dams. It's the most wasteful dam in the world. So if we could save 10 billion cubic meters that Aswan wastes every year because it's built in the wrong position, wrong location, South Sudan wouldn't need more than that amount of water in the foreseeable future. That quenches the thirst and production needs, agricultural needs of South Sudan, for example. So that contributes to the water shortage. In terms of international law, that kind of wastage is considered as doing significant harm to a neighboring riparian country. Normally, in international law, what people conceive of significant harm is a prohibited approach to water usage. You can't do significant harm to your neighbors. What is prohibited? What people think about...
From the source.
Yeah, so they think that Ethiopia is doing significant harm to Egypt. No, it can work the other way. Wasting water that comes from a shared resource is doing significant harm to upstream countries. So significant harm in international law can be done upstream as well as downstream. So Egypt is doing that to the other riparian countries. Don't waste a common resource. Use it economically, conserve it, and make it sustainable in terms of the water usage.
And it has been going on. That has been going on for ages, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because most of the upper riparian countries were not using any meaningful use of the waters. The issue of water quality and quantity, water conservation in Egypt, is a new phenomenon because countries such as Ethiopia are starting to make new uses of the common resource. That's why it became such a significant issue at the moment.
So what does Egypt stand to lose
if
there's extraction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam?
As I see it, at the moment, the GERD doesn't pose any significant danger. I'm not an engineer, but any reasonable person can see that hydroelectric power generation doesn't reduce the volume of the water in any meaningful way. And secondly, at the moment, Egypt is talking about significant harm being done to water availability. Even Sudan is doing the same thing, but consider the amount of water in the Aswan Dam. If no additional drop of water is added to what is currently available in Aswan, Egypt can survive without any problems for 2 years. So that's the amount of water Egypt can live on for 2 years for industry, for agriculture, for tourism, without significant harm to the country. Now, 2 years. But we used about 10 or 15 days to fill the first phase of the GERD. And in that time frame, nothing will happen to the Aswan Dam. So there's really nothing Egypt stands to lose in that sense. But the problem on the side of Egypt is there is this fear of the unknown. Once Ethiopia started to do this, what will happen next? The GARD, they know more than we do. They have the experts. It's not going to do any significant harm to them. But this is the beginning, like I said. And what comes next is agriculture. Ethiopia starts to irrigate, not from the GARD, because the GARD is only the beginning. Once we start to use agriculture water of the Niles for agriculture, for industry, etc., that is a big threat. That changes the calculus of water availability in Ethiopia, in Sudan, in Egypt. I think there is that fear. And the other fear is, like I said earlier, the precedent that Ethiopia is setting without any legal troubles, because this is only lawful for Ethiopia to use its share of the water, it will set precedent for other countries, countries that are sources of the White Nile, to follow suit. If that happens, Egypt then will lose, an amount of water that might be significant, because the Nile, White and Blue Niles, are shared between 11 countries. Now we're talking about 3. And if the other remaining countries start to do the same, which they will, because they can look at Ethiopia's position. Ethiopia has shown that it can lawfully use its share, its fair share of the water, then Egypt will start to lose. So that fear of what would come eventually
become a reality. Is that what you think?
Yes.
So that's bad news for Egypt.
Yes. It's also good news. Let's not be too negative about it. In what sense? That's a good question. Ethiopia, if these negotiations go well, it establishes a joint commission that controls the water, that studies the water quality, the water quantity, rainfall, climate change, and that provides information to all the countries concerned. And that trilateral, multilateral working of teams will bring these countries closer, and then Egypt will have resources to send to Ethiopia by way of trade. Ethiopia will also send electric power to Sudan and Egypt, which I think is being negotiated at least between Ethiopia and Sudan, if my knowledge is correct. So inter-basin trade, inter-basin negotiation, economic interconnectedness will ensue. So in that sense, what would do harm, we'll control it together. What will benefit us, we'll control it together, we'll negotiate every year. And it would create friendly relationship between these countries. That is if the negotiation goes well.
Well, we hope it will. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Takele. It was really a pleasure having you on my show to talk about this very sensitive issue.
Anytime. Thank you very much.